Just thinking again about my development of understanding political charts, going from what I described learning in school to graduating from school to being very online as like the next stage of my political development. And at that point,
you're going to encounter
yeah, the political chart in my head became like fused to that square that we talked about at the beginning. Has authoritarian at the top, libertarian at the bottom, economically right versus economically left on the horizontal axis. Lib left is green, authoritarian left is red. I forget.
Blue and yellow. So
isn't one of them purple?
It might be the top right one's purple. I'm colorblind, but I'm pretty sure it's blue and yellow.
Oh yeah, authoritarian right is blue, libertarian right. There's yellows and purples on Google Images.
We really just got down to the bottom of what color is libertarian right economics. When you go from a single metric, left versus right, in order to make sense of the world on a left-right metric like that, you need to introduce all these weird implications and assumptions into it. Like, for example, that it's shaped like a horseshoe and the far ends get these secondary qualities. If you get at the very end, all of a sudden, these like demented types of behavior show up. Like any single spectrum, if we want it to embody all of politics, is going to carry all these weird implications to it. Like the example we gave before of the left and the right accusing each other of being pedophile enablers, or accusing each other of being authoritarian, Nazis, communists, whatever. When you add that second spectrum, the up and down, the authoritarian versus libertarian, it's like a massive additional amount of wisdom compared to the original one. It's actually really quite stark how much more depth a quad compass has over a single line. There's so much more ability to describe the world through adding those extra axes.
You can now talk about ways in which you're similar to some people, but very different from them in other ways. So it's like, oh, we're both on the left, but we have very different ideas about how power should be distributed in a left-wing society. Yeah, it just gives you more resolution to discuss things. But you still end up lumping a lot. Because like even, okay, you've added the authoritarian, libertarian spectrum to it. So that allows you to kind of not superimpose that onto the left-right spectrum, which is something that some right-wing libertarian people do, where they equate libertarianism with right-wingness. And so fascism and communism are on the same end of the political spectrum,
I've
on the
seen
left-wing end of the political spectrum.
That's one of those agreeing with me versus barbarism graphs that you see in the wild, which is like, oh, it's good libertarian minimum government. The smaller government, the less anarchy is over here. Anarchy, libertarianism. I'm libertarian. It's close to anarchy, but I don't go that far. And then on the other side, you get Nazis and Stalin right next to each other at the end. You have like the little Nazi logo and the little communist logo at the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, Biden's actually pretty close to that side compared to he's close to Nazi and Marxist.
Yeah, well, when your political chart runs from ANCAPs on one side to statists on the other, Biden is pretty close to the communists and the Nazis on one end. But even if you separate that out, and authoritarianism is this up-down line, what libertarian means to people on the left and what it means to people on the right is actually pretty different. Often this gets talked about in terms of negative liberty and positive liberty, where libertarian right is about just leave me alone, and libertarian left is about let's work together to create the preconditions for the most amount of freedom. And it also shows up in like attitudes towards democracy, where on the libertarian left, there's often a lot of respect for democracy. And on the libertarian right, democracy is often framed as kind of like mob rule, or like the majority imposing their will on the minority. You have like Ayn Rand and the individual is the world's smallest minority. They kind of see each individual as a sovereign who should be able to make whatever decisions they want, and democratic decisions being made together can often be an imposition on that. And when you get to the anarchists, the people who call themselves anarcho-capitalists often envision worlds in which we don't need democracy at all, because it's been replaced with individuals merely making rational choices for themselves in the marketplace. Whereas libertarian leftists, anarchists on the left, usually envision highly democratic societies where we are always making decisions together in various ways.
So that was, in a sense, maybe kind of the first type of idiocy that came out of the political compass. It started making people think that directly democratic people, like the left libertarian stuff, like the community libertarian sort of stuff, like libertarian in the original sense of the word. If you want to get technical, the origin of the term libertarian originally referred to something closer to libertarian socialism or anarchy.
Yes.
But it was eventually co-opted by right strains of libertarianism, and they obviously have more money to put out popular conceptions about things because they're all little kings in their little kingdoms. I think in practice over the last probably 15 years or so that I've seen this play out on the internet is like the early phase was everyone's libertarian. And you go in the BBS forums, everyone's doing the political compass. And it's like, how left versus right are you on the libertarian half of it? And then you have like the one guy in the forum who's like really nice, but he's like super Christian and stuff. He uses like certain emojis or whatever. You know those people. And back in the day, and he's up in the auth right, and you're like, oh, you know, Jimmy, he's a hardcore Catholic supremacist, but he's really sweet. That's the way BBSs used to be for the young folks. But it was really like that. It was like all libertarian, like across the board. Libertarian left, oh, libertarian left, left, left. Oh, I was more libertarian left than you, haha. So the first idiocy was that, oh, us libertarians aren't so different. Maybe we should team up against the sort of Nazi communists. And you wouldn't see the same thing on the top. Like, obviously, communists and Nazis are so apart that you wouldn't expect, like, oh, we're not so different. We just need to crush the individualists. But the second idiocy was really surprising to me, and I think is the most active idiocy to this day, sorry to say. It was people saying, I am authoritarian. I want to be authoritarian because I want to differentiate myself from the anarchists. I want to differentiate myself from the green quadrant. I'm a communist, so I want to be in the red quadrant. As if it's two different checkboxes. They can only pick one. They can only pick one quadrant. They want the cool quadrant. And as a result, we have young people on the internet, some old people, saying like, I'm an authoritarian. I think what it does is it contributes to people asserting values that they don't actually have based on a bad map. And originally it was sort of intended, I think, by the guy who made it to be a sort of criticism of authoritarianism. So look, we're all united against the top half of the graph. Like, we've all got these libertarian sentiments. We all think
people
that the drug
say that
wars...
the test itself tends to produce libertarian, like more people test into the lower quadrants just based on kind of the bias of the test itself.
Well, yeah, and the things that drive people to the top half, because the way the questions are set up, no matter what side of the left-right spectrum you're on, you're moving up and down on the same questions. Some of the things that move you higher up on the authoritarian side of the graph are incompatible fundamentally with the theory of communism and socialism. It creates that sort of like libertarian bias. So it creates this cultural bubble of resisting the bias of the chart in a way that creates this weird second option bias. People not wanting to be libertarians has made them identify with things that the chart was set up in a way to really emphasize these are wrong. Even though the majority of people who identify as authoritarian leftists aren't actually authoritarian in meaningful ways. The things that meaningfully define authoritarianism in terms of critiques of authoritarianism, like Hannah Arendt or others, are things that they would not want to co-sign. I think democracy versus authoritarianism is a more useful metric than libertarian versus authoritarian. Like, people who identify as authoritarian, it's not that they did the compass and found objectively they're in the top left red quadrant. So they think the whole thing's kind of bullshit and they don't like libertarianism.
What I see a lot more than people like identifying as authoritarian leftists is people identifying others who they disagree with as authoritarian leftists for all kinds of things, like speaking fondly of the USSR or China or, you know, less commonly North Korea, identifying as a Marxist-Leninist, identifying as a Marxist, vanguard parties and stuff like that that has deep history in the left. All kinds of things can get you placed into the authoritarian left categorization. And I think often like, I'm not saying I've never done that. I do that all the time. I agree with you that I think the entire chart was designed partially as like a critique of those kind of politics. And like, I see it playing out in the discourse that way. I see it as, in some sense, a really useful recruiting tool for libertarian leftists and anarchist leftists. Do you want to be with the authoritarians, or do you want to be with the people who aren't trying to crush your liberty? Leftists often talk about like a communist anarchist divide in a lot of ways. And that just kind of got superimposed onto this spectrum with like quote unquote anarchists calling quote unquote communists authoritarians. I'm not trying to discount that some people are second option bias driven to identifying with authoritarian ideas specifically. I guess I don't know how serious those people are being a lot of the time. They just think that this line shouldn't exist as a spectrum at all, and that the idea of authoritarianism is used to make leftists ineffective by getting them not to identify with doing things that are actually effective.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to seeing people identify as authoritarian, for me, it's more of a pet peeve, but also, I don't know, when I see the graph, like where someone is superimposed on the existing political compass, the left versus right thing stays the same, but then instead of authoritarian versus libertarian, it's how bad do you want it? And the top is you want it a lot, and the bottom is you don't want it at all, implying that democratic, decentralized, leftist forms of organizing are not serious or not interested in taking care of people, making a better world and stuff. Like when I see that, sometimes it really gets under my skin because maybe in a way they're just kidding, but I've talked to these people.
I've never actually seen someone do that, like how bad you want it or like ineffective to effectiveness. Like we identify as effective leftists. That's a good counter assertion of a new map or whatever to.
Yeah, well, and that one is interesting too, because it's like a new assertion on the old map. It's not saying get rid of the previous stuff.
It's not just reframing it.
Because if you reframe it as just a plain new, like obviously no one's going to pick the ineffective side. In any case, not true. It's not useful. It's giving cover to bad shit. And I think that's a bad thing. I don't want to get too deep on this side note about the second option bias and how this relates and stuff, but I think there's really, really good critiques when people are talking about authoritarianism, bureaucracy, lack of accountability, lack of democracy. That stuff's criticized for good reason. I don't think people should identify with those things that are criticized, and maybe they don't think they're identifying with that because the political spectrum gets to be everyone's little Rorschach test and we all get to see whatever we want onto it. And like when I see people say like, I'm authoritarian, I'm like, why are you saying that you would suppress the voices of workers from having a say in their own workplace? Like, what does that have to do with communism? It's literally the opposite of communism.
Yeah, they would be like, well, all these states are democratic, are communist. It's the opposite of what you're saying.
Or it will be, but it has to go through a phase first. In the historical context, they tried it, but it didn't work. There's a lot of muddled arguments around this. Like, depends who you talk to on this stuff. But my ultimate point is that I blame the compass for all this bullshit.
Yeah, I think it is the compass's fault, but also I don't know if it would be better without the compass. Like maybe there's a perfect political compass out there that would meet all the needs and point people on the perfect right path. The problem's with maps not matching the political territory because the shape of politics doesn't have an actual shape.
It's like the sound of the color blue.
Yeah, exactly. So the problem of our maps not matching that is eternal, and there will always be negative side effects towards making any map.
Yeah, I think a lot of the interesting, weird problems of the left in discourse that we see today are things that realistically predate the political compass and like some of just the weird ways that people act around politics and partisanship and stuff. Like these are deep felt, long-standing issues. And
I meant the specific little nerdy debates about the compass itself were the fault of the compass, not the deeper political disagreements. I think those have to do with material reality more so than our charts. Often.
Yeah. And I guess whatever shape of compass is popularized in the early 2000s, in whatever timeline, we find some weird ways to argue about it over seemingly finicky details that are quite important to all of us.